So today's speaker, I talked to you a little bit last week, so I won't do a whole ton on it. But Bob Whittick is like who you should stay awake for the whole semester. Just if you want to give it one try, today's your day. So yeah, I think that's all the information. Okay.
You are warned, everybody, so thank you. I am probably a rare person you're going to meet because I'm the only person you may ever meet who is a native Washingtonian. I was born here. Oh, see? Oh, you are too? Are you a native Washingtonian?
Are you talking DC or Washington?
The area. Okay. And there's another. And there's another. There are tons of them, actually. But, you know, when you go through your career here, we're few. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to give you just a little background of what I've been doing for the last almost 40 years. When I got out of college, I ended up going to Capitol Hill, and I was a press secretary in the Senate for about 10 years. And after that, I joined a very large global public relations firm and worked here in Washington, but for global clients, and it was a great experience. But it wasn't enough, because what I wanted to do as a gay man is work on issues I both cared about and also focus on the intersection of business and demographics. You know, gay people had a long civil rights trajectory to be open in their lives and to be considered visible. And so 25 years ago, I started my own firm, the one that I still have. As far as I know, I haven't been to the office today. But what I learned is that, like America itself, corporations had a deep learning curve. This was in 1993 when I began. It was like radioactive. It was a subject they had to deal with, but they always put on asbestos apparel to deal with it because saying it out loud was even tough. But they were confronting it. So I'm going to give a little narrative about a major role I played for almost 25 years with American Airlines. They're an interesting brand to consider because I want to bring it into the idea of economic bedfellows and political bedfellows. How do companies play a role and as a public stakeholder? I mean, we all know a corporation has one fundamental, and that's to succeed with its shareholders. It has to return profit, has to develop customers, it has to have products or services that people want to buy. Airlines have been with us 90 years, 80, 90 years, and mostly they take us from A to B. So they take everybody, you know, the weak, the tired, the poor, the huddled masses trying to get out a coach. And what happened in 93 was very emblematic of where America was at the time. When I was beginning to work with them, they had two major issues arose. It was the age of probably a great deal of continued ignorance about HIV and AIDS. There was plenty of science and medical knowledge, but it wasn't inculcated everywhere it needed to be. American Airlines fumbled the ball badly twice in 93. In June of 93, the LGBT community was held its huge march in Washington. And many of these people who were coming back to Texas were on American Airlines. So they had whole flights where a lot of the passengers were gay people traveling back. And a bizarre thing happened on this one flight that I think was a turning point for almost all companies in America. One of the flight crew sent a message back to Dallas that when the plane landed, they would have to remove all the pillows and blankets for fear of HIV and AIDS contamination. And you know, today, your eyes go big. You go, what? They really thought that? If that were true, you know, that all the seats in this room would have been infected long ago, or all the planes in America would have been infected. If it were that casual, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd be having a different one. But it showed a profound ignorance, a profound lack of understanding of basic medical science to begin with. So health, that was the big blunder. But the bigger blunder for them at the moment was the fact that they equated gay people as simply transmitters of AIDS. They dumbed it down to that time to think that gay people were just the primary contagion. And so there's a notion almost of quarantine. It was deeply offensive and completely stupid. But imagine this, there are 100,000 employees at American Airlines and only one did this. But it reverberated across society at that time in many different ways. But the LGBT community took great affront. They thought it was profoundly insulting. But to compound it, later that year, a man, Timothy Hollis, who is living with, actually, as they call today in the cliche, full-blown AIDS. He actually had symptoms that were rather dramatic. And he was traveling to see family, I think, for maybe his last visit home. He gets on the plane, and he had at that time, which is a strange way to travel and difficult to travel, he had an IV. And he intended to put the drip feed up in the baggage compartment and have it drip down. Kind of unnerving the flight crew, appropriately, I think, actually, because they were thinking, how are we going to do that? That's not going to be either safe or workable. And so they objected, but they objected badly. And there was a CNN crew in the airport at the time and caught it, where they actually physically had to lift him out and take him off the plane. Those two things were strikes 1 and 2. And the company was reeling because by then they had so profoundly misunderstood the issue. You know, today if those things happen, we have so many social networks, we know about all of this like that. But it was bubbling up fast. And I was invited down. I knew the head of corporate communications, and he said, we have a major backlash issue growing here. We're finding ourselves embattled, and we want to get this right. We have to figure out how we're going to turn the corner on these major blunders. They were offending a lot of people. Certainly gay people were top of that list, but there were a lot of people who thought it was profoundly ignorant. What happened was interesting. I ended up at a great meeting, though. I was in a meeting where I had the top communications officer of the firm, Tim Doak, the top doctor, Jeff Davis, who was in the room, and their general counsel. So we had the right, apostles in the room who were people who knew what was going on, and another young man from communications. And the conversation went along the lines of, well, how do we do this? And my major response was pretty basic. I said, this is not lipstick on this. This is not tarting it up to make it look better. This is a fundamental change. And so the public relations response had to be based on policy change. And so I said, that's where we began. But interestingly, the doctor or the lawyer, I can't remember, or the Indian chief, one of them said to me, do you think we have a lot of gay people at American Airlines? And I didn't laugh. I didn't say anything because I just said, well, you can't know how many gay people are, but obviously from your question, you don't know any. So you don't even know a gay person? You have 100,000 employees, you don't know any? Turns out the other young man in the room was closeted. And he would not come out to us till we walked all the way downstairs, out in the building, out on the sidewalk. And I realized at that moment, 1993, how much they had needed to get their heads wrapped around this. He wasn't even feeling safe in a meeting where we're having a conversation about it to talk about it. So that was the beginning. The good news from the CEO down, they got it, that they had a problem. So it wasn't just a market problem, but it was also a philosophy problem. If you're an airline or if you're think of any industry that you're in, everybody's your customer and everybody's your employee. You want to actually have a face on that company that says that everybody matters. Their challenge, though, is also how public they would say that. To me, the last 25 years have been a matter of risk and reward. And 25 years ago, it was almost all risk. Companies, when they decided to take action or to move in this direction, they did it with so much 24, or 360 degrees sensitivity. They were worried about offending anybody, everybody, all the time. In fact, one of the earliest conversations they always came down to, they always say, well, it's about the gays or about God. Because they were afraid Christians would be so deeply offended. And I said, every time you say that, do you realize how offensive that is to a lot of people? Because it's like gays can't be Christians too, or some of the Christians aren't gay. This is like defining people in camps. And if you're adversarial, you decide people are in camps, then you're missing the boat. You're just missing the whole boat. So the first piece of advice I gave them was that they had to start a diversity council. Now today, most companies have these. They have bodies or groups of employees who are called employee resource groups, other things. But 25 years ago, there were not that many. Americans certainly didn't have one. But I gave them a template, and I said, here are the kinds of groups, here are the kinds of bylaws that would make sense. We organized around some principles of engagement. And the interesting thing for American, and rare for most companies. They did have a Christian employee group, which a lot of companies don't have, which I thought they should have. I think giving voice internally is such a powerful thing for integrity. And also it tells the publics that they face that we see our employees in all these various ways. We see them as people of color, people of disability. We see them as people of faith. We see them as people who are family people who are raising kids in a single mother's, a model, or we see gay couples. But the very first diversity council, the two co-chairs were the head of the Christian group and the head of the gay group. And if you put them together, they have to work together. In fact, one of the things that happened over time is they saw a united front. They could face these issues together and not demonize each other. That was a very important thing to do. And it mattered later because as American was criticized by anti-gay groups, the Christians inside defended them because they said, we have respect. We feel welcomed here. We don't feel we're outliers. Interestingly, at the time, you can't even imagine this because this is what happened. Within the next 2 years, they were beaten by a hurricane of opposition. I mean, a real hurricane. Imagine a company, they're sitting there doing this, beginning to build some bridges. They were sponsoring some groups. They were the first corporate sponsor of the Human Rights Campaign, the very first. And as they did these things, at the time, there was a legion or a group of anti-gay groups around America that began to really invest dollars in beating them up. They ended up, I remember one week where they had full-page ads opposing them in almost every major newspaper in America. Now, the funny thing is today, newspapers just don't have that clout. But this was before the internet. It was just the early stages of the internet. There were 3 internet providers, Prodigy, CompuServe, and America Online. That was it. So there are only 3 places you could even go to talk to people online. So there really wasn't that wasn't a force to be reckoned with. But newspapers did matter. And so they were spending money. And a full-page ad in a newspaper would cost between $25,000 and $75,000. And if you did it in every one, you're talking about maybe a campaign of several $100,000 or maybe $1 million. Can you imagine? Today, if you did that with a company that's friendly to gay people, first of all, you run out of money in a hurry, but you'd have 1 million targets. You couldn't even begin to do it. But American was alone pretty much at the time. The other carriers were not doing this. They were nervous. American did what a lot of companies did at the time too. They did it through philanthropy. They were focused on giving back to organizations, primarily were involved in HIV and AIDS, which was a good thing too, because it showed a understanding, a knowledge, a growing knowledge of how to teach their own employees about HIV and AIDS, because it isn't a gay disease. It's a health issue, and it affects anybody or everyone in its transmission. So we understand that. But what happened is the corner that American turned at the time opened a path that many other companies understood. What it did is, it's in a sense, it was both good public affairs strategy, but also marketing 101. It's like saying every customer matters. Why would you leave a customer behind? And so doing that turned into a very important strategic opportunity for them. They became the poster corporation for trying to make change by building a business case. And so the last 25 years is trying to create that business case, to do the metrics, the data behind it, how many people, because again and again and again, you're asked, how many people are we talking about? And I'm going to shift to today where we are, but I want to mention this very importantly, because at the beginning, when we began this work, there was this mythology. They would see a gay person as affluent. They would just presume that gay people are all richer than everybody else. But designed both by indirection and mistakes made by gay marketers, who often would single out gay people as affluent and try to make them a desirable market. They are, for a lot of reasons, but so are everybody. Is there any market that's not desirable if it's a customer? People, you don't judge them by how much they earn. You judge them by how much they need or how much they spend. Gay people do have a disproportionate interest in travel. They do tend to invest more in it, and as they would say, they call them dinks, the double income, no kids. When there's a gay couple, they often had no kids. So that's changing quickly now. Gay families are sprouting up everywhere. Children are being raised in all kinds of families and by single people. But at the time, it was this myth of the gay white male who was driving things. And we objected to it at the beginning. I tried to get metrics wrapped around it, but tried to change their thinking so they understood the diversity in every community. The demographics of the LGBT community is everybody. There is no ethnicity, race, background, or geography that treats it differently. Homosexuality and bisexuality and transgender people are found everywhere. So that's what these companies are trying to do. And for the last 25 years, I've been trying to help them articulate that case. How do they talk about it? Because it isn't just to the customer. It has to be, as we did with American, we had to focus on internal. Because if you get it right inside, chances are you're going to do better talking to everybody. And the voice has to be consistent. The message has to be the same. If you value people, you say that everywhere. And they began to do that over and over and over again until it became their DNA. It's very interesting because when the Corporate Equality Index, the Human Rights Campaign, and I did actually conduct the first one. It was in 1999, and it wasn't a national cross-section. But we went in the Washington area in 1999, contacted major employers across the Washington metro area, and we asked them some basic questions like, do you have non-discrimination policies that include sexual orientation? We didn't even ask gender identity. I think at the time it wasn't top of mind. We asked about partner benefits, domestic partner benefits for gay couples. Basic questions. The funny thing about that whole exercise was how many refused to respond. They're just so nervous about, in 1999, about being perceived as a gay-friendly employer. They were doing, as many said, we do what the EEOC requires. We do what civil rights law requires. We, non-discrimination against every category under law. So they were saying we're obedient, but we're not visionary. We don't have any policy about other kinds of people. So that was halting and inaccurate, but very educational to learn that. And then 2002, when HRC began this task of trying to model and benchmark companies and saying that it's good for your business. You want to have these policies because you'll be able to recruit and retain the best, everybody. You want to have the most competitive workforce. And by doing that in these other policies, you can be a leader. And so in 2002, American did apply and got 100% that first year among only, I think, 7 or 8 companies that today still exist. Many of those companies, like some of the dot-coms, don't exist anymore. They've fallen aside. But American showed the way, and it's funny because I'm helping them prepare for the announcement. I think it's next week. We're doing the 14th year in a row. And to them, it's like breathing in and out. They have to get 100% because failing to get 100% would be such a ding on their corporate reputation. But what's changed the most, to me, it's most gratifying, is not that LGBT stakeholders are the drivers of this any longer. Actually, the drivers of this are in this room. I think what's happened is I call the gay marketplace or the gay community is now a millennial community because the millennial population have been so effective in voicing their philosophies, their values about who gets included. They don't have patience. They don't have patience for generations that are building the walls. They don't get it about Donald Trump's wall on Mexico. They don't get it about gay couples in love who can't marry. They don't get it that all the things that my generation and older generations did were so backwards. And I think that's the thing that's affecting companies the most today. If gay people represent perhaps 5 to 10%, somewhere in that range of people, self-identified LGBT people, that's a tiny amount. That's not even 51% to change things. The real change is millennials and their desire to see a different face in the world. And it's what companies are now paying closest attention to. But remember, again, when we started in the 90s, we were beginning to do sponsorships and causes that they were on board, which is always a very good path. It's safer. But also, they were beginning to do some marketing, but they would do it only in a gay publication. They would have a gay ad in a gay magazine or a gay website that were emerging, and you could talk to only gay people. That's behind us. And why is that behind us? Again, I think it's a millennial attitude. But now you witness just a great example, and I just huge fan of companies like Amazon, Apple, the ones that are really forward, that they are risk takers, but they they keep their eye on the next thing. You know, they always are thinking over the horizon, what's happening. And what was it? The Kindle Paperwhite. I'm not sure you may have seen this ad. They did something fairly profound and change in terms of opportunity. They put an ad together, a television spot actually, which is a lot more expensive. And it had a couple, a guy and a woman on a beach talking. And one's on the Kindle Paperwhite. I think the guy is, and the woman is trying to look at this terrible screen. She can't read it in the glare. So they're chatting, and then at the end of the ad, just as an aside, they both refer to their husbands who are behind there, and they talk about having a drink together. But first time, I think, in American history, in an ad, somebody mentioned his husband. A guy had mentioned it. But the weirder thing about it was, as furtive as some of the early market efforts were, this one was amazing because I remember seeing it on Spike television. There was I'm embarrassed to tell you this, Laura, but I was watching Braveheart, which I can't even explain why. Or in the middle of Braveheart, of all the films to watch where you'd see this ad, I thought, God, I thought the sound of TVs clicking off when they saw this, but they didn't. The world didn't end. It was on American Idol. They showed it all over the place, all over the spectrum of channels. So they clearly believed, as I do, that this was good for everybody to see. There was nothing radical about this idea. And then fast forward to even now, a good friend of mine, John Lake, formerly of the Human Rights Campaign, he's the LGBT and diversity marketer for Wells Fargo, just did the most profound television spot, part of a campaign that's underway. It's getting lots of awards. Has a lesbian couple who actually are a real couple. This is the other element that's changed in terms of marketing. When we began, it was all done with stock photography and actors or models playing gay, you know, or at least appearing in an image as a gay couple. In this instance, it was an actual gay couple, and they were actually a lesbian couple who were adopting a girl. And she was deaf, and she is deaf. And the two of them were independently learning signing, which I thought was tremendous because they were also connecting with people who are living with various forms of disability. And these two women were so inspired to try to learn how to communicate with their new daughter. And it's so emotional. You can't even imagine. They're meeting their daughter for the first time. They're capturing it. They're speaking to her in sign. And you just get it. That one thing that was common about this image, it could have been any family. It didn't have exceptionalism, which is what I think I've been trying to tell my corporations I work with for the last 25 years. Gay people don't live in a separate box or room or house. They just don't. They're surrounded, as I am, with their straight families and friends and coworkers. We live everywhere. We are everywhere. And so the modeling that they're beginning to show is the idea you don't have to have a campaign that is segregated. People don't understand this. It's funny, when I was growing up, and especially in black and white television, actually I would say it was only white television because almost every ad, black people didn't appear in any TV commercial, almost at all. And they rarely appeared on television. There was a great African-American historian who pointed out that if you're watching TV in the 50s in New York, and all of a sudden Lena Horne, Sam Cooke, some great artist, you know, entertainer who's African-American would appear, they would pop out the door and yell down the street. Everybody turned to Channel 4. You'll see an African, they would say a Negro at the time. They wouldn't say that. But they would all turn their TV sets because they'd never seen that. It was rare to see black people. So the course of popular culture and marketing has so changed the idea that some people don't exist until they do exist. And so if you leave out people, or today, it's even radical today to have mixed race couples. You're seeing that in a Cheerios or other cereal spots, and you're seeing a mixed race couple, and it brings out profound responses from people. Largely, I think, tremendously moving ones, encouraging ones, because people see their own families. But it also scrapes that underbelly of ugly. You know, the kinds you see in political campaigns where people just get crazy because they can object to things that, you know, they couldn't object to out loud. They can go on Facebook, or they can go on Twitter, they can go on any social post and put out some nuts. But companies are emboldened to do that for a lot of reasons, because one, it's true, it's the truth, and telling the truth is what companies, I think, are doing a better job of because you insist on it. And second, they're doing it because it's a great way actually to reach a bigger audience. So when Wells Fargo did this one spot, or a cereal commercial does it, and they know it's a risk, but they also know that they're bound to get this extraordinary burst of sharing. And that's what we are doing the most of today. Companies are looking for you to tell the story in your words rather than them in their words. Better for you to be the interpreter and the storyteller. And that's what they're counting on. I was asked a few years ago, which had the best pride campaign of all? And I thought it was maybe Oreos because they did this beautiful rainbow Oreo. It had like, the 6 layers, the colors. And the guy did it on Photoshop. And I thought, boy, for the return on investment, it took him like a half an hour to create it. And everybody shared it. So it was like ubiquitous. You couldn't escape it. And that's the power that companies have today because they are using all of those tools to allow us to tell their stories. Why does it matter? It matters for brand reputation, for consideration, and largely, here's the other thing. The 3 largest clients I have today that I work with all the time are Marriott, American Airlines, and Walmart. And they're by background, by reputation, old school. They've been around a long, long time. They're conceived and perceived as conservative corporations. But the thing that's wonderful about them, to various degrees, is how much they are willing to put their shoulder into contemporary storytelling, to narratives and reputation building that reaches new people in a fresh way. How do you tell a new story about an airplane or a store or a hotel? What you want to do is you want to do it experientially. You want to do it through your experiences, not theirs. The more they do it as a brand, say, love me, it doesn't work. What they want to hear is that you love them because you can say in your own experience what you felt when you saw that. I'll fast forward also to the campaigns we've been doing with Marriott. Marriott's been around a long time. Marriott family are Mormons. A lot of people are aware of that and conceive that they are very conservative in many ways. They are a Republican by and large, but they're actually forward in thinking in terms of inclusion. They were one of the very first hotel companies to offer partner benefits. In this past year, this one I want to get to the religious freedom battles. This is where the new business edge is going. Businesses like Marriott understand that the economic climate for them has to be welcoming. And the idea that discrimination to them is like a poison. It's a buzzkill. If people thought that their hotels were only meant for Mormons, obviously they couldn't make a profit at all. But today they're the largest hotel company in the world. They have more properties in the world today. And they do it not because they are a Mormon company, they're a publicly traded company, but what they do is they project this message of welcome for everybody. And 2 years ago began a campaign which I'm very proud that I've been part of called Love Travels. And Love Travels is the first time actually and it's hashtag Love Travels, of course, because you have to have a hashtag for everything because it is a sharing, social world that we live in. But what they ended up doing, getting a tremendously gifted photographer, artist, and he captured gay people and transgender people who are real. None of them were models. They were real couples, real people, real families. And he captured them and talked about what it is about love and travel that they actually love, how they travel as a family or as a couple. And the artistry and everything he did was powerful. In fact, we got Jason Collins, the former NBA player. He was still playing at the time. It was his first commercial contract. We included him in it, and first transgender model, Gina Rosero. And in Washington, if you were here a couple of years ago, they ended up with, hotel wall images, 10 stories high, with gay people on all the hotels here in town, which is really powerful. To see Jason Collins, 10 stories tall next to the White House, or Gina Rosero, a transgender model, 8 stories tall on a Renaissance. So it was a very powerful campaign, but the other better news about it is it was only the first phase of a longer campaign, and it was the first time ever that any marketer had started out with the LGBT part of their campaign as the leader. They've done other communities. They've done a great investment in Latina imagery and storytelling and bilingual, and also African Americans. They've done it with probably, I think, people who are very contemporary, much younger, and doing great things, artists, business people who are really caught in the act of being themselves. So I think that's what millennial philosophy has changed too, is the idea that we see quickly through artifice. We don't want to have people who are scripted. We'd prefer they say it in their own words, what they think. and they tell a story. And so these companies have used that platform to build a really important business, and the idea of risk doesn't really exist in their heads as much. And now it's mostly reward. But the page that's turned the last couple of years, the marriage juggernaut in June changed a lot of the blowback. They're not going to unwind that. You're not going to change marriage or get rid of marriage for everybody. That's going to continue. That's the U.S. is on board. What is a problem, though, is this wave of it's presumably or predominantly anti-gay legislation to allow people to opt out. Religious freedom laws are designed to do two or three different things. So the two most prominent are to allow government officials like Kim Davis in Kentucky deny marriage licenses, famously. She tried to get away with that. People said, no, that's not going to happen. The no people are losing in government services because it's a public responsibility. Americans get that pretty quickly, and you hear it even from the Mormon church leaders just said it a week or two ago. But the other area they want to do is carve out exemptions for business. They want a business to say, if you're a clerk whose faith tells you so, that you can deny service. Now, interestingly, obviously that creates huge problems for any business. If you're a Walmart or somebody else, you can't have people picking and choosing which customers they can serve and which ones they will deny service to. And that's an issue of religious freedom overreach. We saw in Indiana last year. We saw it in Arizona. We've seen it in Arkansas, Georgia. Other states are trying to carve it out so that people of purportedly Christian faith, although they're writing the language rather broadly, but it's intended to support the Kim Davises of the world, to be the veto over whether or not they are served. We're running court battles in various places. Our friend Tobias Wolff is helping on a case that they won in the New Mexico Supreme Court, where a wedding photographer refused to photograph a gay wedding. And the interesting thing I want to point out about some of these laws that the gay plaintiffs are winning for a number of reasons, these cases were not based on gay marriage. These are based on laws in certain jurisdictions that were predating that. It's the same laws that we achieved in the 60s when we said African Americans could not be denied at lunch counters in hotels and in theaters, that we didn't have separate rooms in theaters for people of different races. When I was growing up, we did. We actually had separate places for people of different races. And all of those laws, by the way, if you ask some of the judges of the today and some of the public policy figures, they often said, too, that their Bible told them that. They often said that. In Virginia, where the famous Loving case, a white man and a black woman married in Washington, D.C., moved back to Virginia, and the police told them to leave the state or go to jail because it was against Virginia law for two people of different races to marry. The judge in Virginia at that time cited the Bible as his premise until the Supreme Court overturned them. So these arguments are not new. They're just not new. It's the idea of when you have competing forces, when people of faith think that they are the victims, that they're victimized by change. They are now fighting back with laws that, thankfully, business leaders see as buzzkill to business. What could be worse to the state of Indiana than to have the NCAA basketball finals moved, or Super Bowls, or World Series games, and all of those things go away if the climate of the state becomes one of discrimination rather than welcome. And I think that's the thing that was a huge sea change this year. It was building up over a long time, but it came to a head this year because the circumstances in every climate, every business that they're facing these kinds of obstacles. CEO of Marriott, Arne Sorensen, called it nuts. He said it was crazy what they were doing in Indiana. They were very bold about what they were talking about and opposing it. But they don't feel that's even a risk. To them, it's just clearly patent that denying anybody service is a way of telling everybody you're not welcome. You know, if it's gay people today, who else is it tomorrow? Or if it was black people yesterday, it's gay people today. It's just every audience or every demographic is touched by this. And I think that's why they have wisely organized around this to take it on. And there's a great deal of work being done on it today. I'm involved in a lot of these coalition campaigns where each time it pops up. Last year in Texas, there were 23 bills that arose, actually, and only one of them passed, and it was sort of mindless. It was the idea that pastors or religious leaders did not have to perform gay marriages if they wish not to, which of course is fundamentally the constitutional protection they already have. It didn't change anything, but it was lip service to the deniers. So that's sort of the arc of how we've come to where we are today, with large measure, I think, on the cutting edge of activism 25 years ago, but today it's built on this platform of demographics. It's built on a generational change, and also, God love it, communications. All the work that happens today, when I talk about those full-page ads, nobody would even think of that. It would be a waste of your money. And also, for that same amount of money, you could spread digital, messages on the web and on social posts everywhere. So it's very different. The good news is, the good news is we're winning most of these. The bad news is we still have the cutting edge of people who are transgender now being demonized. All the same stories, actually, that black people were thought of as sexually predators and were demonized about sharing bathrooms back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. That was an issue. Gay people, same, predators of children. You didn't want a gay person in your bathroom or in your store or in your hotel. Today, it's transgender people. They think of it as men wearing dresses in order to prey on girls and women. And they have so demonized that story. That's the next cusp. And I think that's the work that business and all of us have to do to try to educate people as to who transgender people are. Who is Caitlyn Jenner? Who are people who are a different gender or a gender at birth and then realize over time awareness that they are not that gender, they're a different gender. American people haven't yet figured that out, but it's interesting. Actually, when we fought the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, was always down to bathrooms, that women and men would share the same bathrooms. This is always, Americans are a little keyed up over bathrooms for some reason, I'm not sure why. But so we have to change that argument in some ways and stop the demonizing with a lot of education. But the transgender part of the community is probably the one that's most at risk today, the one that's fully on the front of change. But I think business will actually be a good partner there. In the last 25 years, business has learned that they can do this. They can make a strong business case. They can frame it in terms of the talent needs they face, the competition needs they face, the customer and market needs that they desire, and also to be truth tellers. The idea that companies that get it right and speak to the values that their audiences share are successful. When Howard Schultz at Starbucks spoke back to a shareholder, said, no, we do this because this is a good thing for our business, but it's the right thing. Or Tim Cook opposing bad religious freedom measures in Alabama, his home state. For them, they articulate more clearly today why that is something they can, that they believe is core to their philosophy, to their business strategy, and to their demographics. And the next frontier, in addition to transgender, is the world. We think in some ways we're finished here in the US, we're not, but we know around the world we still face tremendous criminalization, hostility, and almost a lot of societies, certainly Africa and much of the Middle East, where people are at risk. And we're doing a lot more with these companies about trying to think over the horizon. How can, in your generation, whether you're gay or straight, or you have a family member who's gay, you want them to succeed, and that may mean they're going to run something in Botswana, or they're going to run something in Singapore, and they're going to have an opportunity as a global employer to be posted in the world in a place where their family may not be recognized. They got to bring their partner, their husband, their wife, and their children, and they want to not be barred from doing all the things that allow them to succeed. I'm just starting work this week on an innovative program with Stanford. Stanford's business school is launching the first LGBT executive leadership program with this notion in mind that LGBT people in business who have risen certain levels, like women and other groups, the ceiling hits them. And identity there's a bias in their employment, no matter how great an employer it is, and try to help mentor these people to be all they can be in the world, not just here at home, They can't just be running a company in Kansas City or Boston, but they can do it in Botswana. They can do it around the world, and they can do it safely. So that's something I think that's very exciting. But business sees this as very important, because if you're Accenture or you're JP Morgan Chase or you're any of these large global, Deloitte, any of these businesses that work in enterprises around the world, they see this as key to their future, that they want to compete in that high talent realm and build an enterprise where they really get it right and keep people safe. And in that world, that's the issue of safety is a real one. We're not doing as Carly Fiorina was attacking Tim Cook, because she said it's all well and good for him to attack Indiana and all that, but he's selling iPhones to Saudi Arabians, and they're beheading gay people here and there. And his point was very simple. He can't change Saudi Arabia, not Tim Cook, even Tim Cook with all his market share. But it's wonderful to realize that even in hateful countries where they're at risk, that kid could own an iPhone, could be gay, and know that the CEO of that company was a gay man. That's very empowering. At least he knows, or she might know, that she has a life or a future that's valued, and see that success is not denied you because she sees somebody who has made that possible and created a global brand that's extraordinarily successful in creating customers in every country in the world. So that's the future, and that's why for 25 years, even though I came off the Hill for 10 years in the Senate, the 25 years I worked on the business side have taught me one thing, is that change there is dynamic. It's real. It's based on people. It's based on lives. It's based on needs. It moves forward in a dynamic way that politics, regrettably, cannot do today. We don't see the change in America in terms of Congress or other bodies that business people can do. And that's what's inspiring, is that these businesses, for all their manifest flaws and quirks and faults, they at least have it right in terms of knowledge. What they're trying to do is capture as much knowledge and succeed in harnessing that knowledge to make all of us matter. And those are very exciting things. I think American business had been on the cutting edge of this, and yet now there are companies around the world that are seeing it. It's interesting because I'm trying to think, what's the name of the big Chinese company that's competing? Alibaba. Alibaba they want to be the Amazon of the world. They want to take over for them, but they're a huge presence. They're certainly in China, but they're coming to the United States. And even they begin to realize that engagement with diverse customers like LGBT people matters to them. So they thought, gosh, if you get Alibaba or somebody else on board, what a huge change that is. Because now you're finding multinationals around the world that say, I've got to be more like Amazon. I've got to be more like, Google. Because to them, those are the models that are succeeding. They're the ones that are harnessing public change with their private objectives. Well, I blathered for a while, Laura. I've been blathering. So I would love to entertain some questions or some challenges or some criticisms or whatever, or a few jokes, whatever you have. Anybody have a question for me? Way back there. Hi. American, the CEO is already pretty much on board, but still risk averse. I mean, he didn't want to do a great many things. And so they would do the things that they thought were high reward and very low risk to begin with. And I think it's building that confidence. Because by the next CEO, there was a couple things happened that were interesting. The year later, right after we had all those setbacks in 93, 94, there was a 25th anniversary celebration in New York City of Stonewall, the Stonewall Uprising. And so thousands and thousands of people were going to fly into New York for that. American was braced because they thought, oh, we're going to go through part two of this drama. We're going to face another one of these things. So they did an amazing thing. They invited me to write a script for their vice chairman, Bob Baker, since passed away, but this is an old school guy. You know, he was up there in age and seniority. And I wrote the script and he delivered it on video, and every one of their employees saw it. It was basically reminding them the basics of AIDS, for one thing, but also welcoming LGBT people. But the funny thing is, in 1994, when he did that, I still have that. I should trot it out once in a while. None of them, not one of these employees worldwide had ever heard an executive say the word gay out loud. Some cried. They just cried because they couldn't imagine. They lived in a company or worked in a company where their leader would say that. And he did it in a good way. He did it respectfully. So once they learned those kinds of steps that, you know, they didn't die right after that. It didn't collapse everything they were doing. They began to realize a lot of the risks were manufactured. You know, they're made up. Even that blowback, that massive blowback that they faced in the papers and other places, that was a few, not a lot. I mean, it was amazing. What I always say is as soon as those people object, they go back and take their kids to soccer. I mean, you know, they get mad because they're told to be mad, but then they realize in the scheme of things it didn't change anything, that the world went on. After marriage happened this past June, a lot of other marriages haven't collapsed yet. I mean, that's the fear. They thought their marriages would be bogus. So there is a lot at the top you have to do. And also, try to get them to say it. Just get them to say it, walk into a room, do a speech, invite them to something. Bob Crandall, who was CEO of American at the time, came here to DC to speak to an AIDS group. But they'd never done that before. He was blown away because usually people, when you talk to the CEO of an airline, you bitch. You know, you tell them about a bad experience. Everybody came up and said that he had not experienced that before. It sort of changed his way of thinking. I remember Senator Chuck Robb of Virginia was funny. He was my senator for a number of years. He went to a human rights campaign dinner early in the 90s in Boston, and he kept talking about how good-looking and well-dressed everybody was. And I kept thinking, what did he think? I mean, you know, they're not going to be that different from everybody else. They're wearing black tie. They look fine. They probably have a little more money than some in a room. But his idea of what he would be walking into was based on ignorance. And so over time, it's a huge coming out process. Because when I told American, I said, you know, what you have to do is you have to find your gay employees and give them a voice. As much as I want to consult with you, if you're not even talking to them. And after a while, they were so well positioned. They were in the middle of driving decisions, and some of the senior executives who were gay came out. Because there are a lot of people in those upper echelons who are gay and terrified of losing their positions. When I left, the amazing thing was the chief marketing officer for American was, to me, a young man. He was 39. He was a CMO for American Airlines, the largest carriers in the world, born in Iran, educated in Paris and Stanford, and openly gay. He had all of those things going for him. He is a direct report to the CEO, and I thought, this is such a great model. People, he was empowered to, you know, begin speaking and telling his story. The only thing he was worried about is his Iranian relatives, which I get. He had to worry about fear and risk for them. But he wasn't worried about him. He didn't worry about his life or his career. Today, there's a big movement I'm helping on, too, about getting more LGBT people on boards of directors. That's a big problem. It's a big gap. There aren't that many. Walmart, actually, is one of the few companies I've ever worked for. Had an open lesbian on there who was tremendous, a great executive and one of the drivers in that company. So I think being present, being visible is a big change. And it's a lot easier to do that today, but you have to have all those elements, don't you? You have to have the C-suite, you have to have the executives, and you have to have them be vocal, which is great. Other questions? Right here.
Is there anything that continues to surprise you after working on this issue for so long?
No, you know, it doesn't surprise me, but you know what is gratifying is to me to see it's global. I mean, I'm going to London in February to speak at a gay sporting conference, but it's a who's who of huge brands. It's Adidas, it's Nike's already big in the United States, but Adidas feels they're being left behind. A lot of the consulting firms and the big banks that sponsor sponsor global sporting events. And I want to align the interests of LGBT people with women. Because some of these countries where we have these major sporting events, women are treated like crap. I mean, they're outsiders in their own societies. If you have soccer, played in Dubai, that's not a very welcoming environment for women or for a lot of other people. But what I think they have to have some organizing principles by the corporations that underwrite most sports in the world to agree that there are certain principles you have to agree to, and that's true inclusion, true inclusion. We've seen it. In fact, Saudis, I think, have sent now women's sporting teams at times. So there is some of that change going on. You can't change a country's culture and faith. You're not going to really change that. But if they want to compete in the world in a serious way, especially in areas like sports and athletics, that's a great connective, great universal theme. And companies can after Sochi especially, can wrap their heads around how do you be the universal brand that doesn't discriminate, and say they have power. But you have to start, in Sochi they started 6 months before the games, so you have to start 10 years before when the contracts were written. You can't start the day before. It's like doing your homework all, at the end of the semester. You're going to catch up that fast. You can't. But those are the things that are exciting, because I think what's happened now, instead of one-offs, American doing this work, or Marriott or Wells Fargo, is that they're united to do some great work. And it's but again, I don't want to leave anybody behind. I think what we have to do is think, women have been struggling with these issues for a long time, and I think we have to make common cause. That gender, race, ability, sexual orientation have got to be united in saying these things. And I think companies want to hear that. There's somebody back there, all the way in the back first. Go ahead.
Yeah, so going off of what you were saying to answer that question, when you talk about like how gay people are overcoming a struggle and how black people are also, but in the campaigns where more gay people are being represented, are black gay people being represented in the same way? And then when we compare celebrities who come out from transgender, like Caitlyn Jenner, but do we talk about black transgender women like Laverne Cox, who have came out even before her but don't get the same type of representation? So is anybody working towards that?
Everybody should be, and it's a big issue. There's racism everywhere. The LGBT community is no stranger to racism at all. And I think what we have to do is understand it. Most of the people I think mostly at risk in the world, in the community, probably are transgender black women, because they are so demonized and subject to violence. It's not even the lack of getting a job, it's just the idea of getting through life. Getting home safely is an issue. So that's going to always ride on the back of this movement of inclusion. Is race is going to be not an outlier, but an integral issue of dealing with it. The good news is the census tells us that gay couples disproportionately are higher proportion of mixed race than straight couples. If you were falling in love with somebody, you fall in love with them. And race is less of an issue. In straight relationships, it's more of an issue because I think you have more family pressure, black or white or whatever, not to have a mixed race union. But with gay couples, you disproportionately see mixed race couples. I had a friend of mine, a black gay man, who said, if I see a white man and a black man together, I assume they're gay. Because he assumes that that's the relationship, is that they're partners or boyfriends. Laverne Cox is great. She's a great change agent. I went to the correspondence dinner at the Hilton, and I saw her there with the publisher of the Washington Blade, her host. And I saw her, she was talking to Katie Couric and Justice Anthony Scalia. I thought, where in the world does that exist? But I thought, if she could only educate them, great, But that's going to be a really important subject for us to talk about a lot. And also, for gay people to get involved in Black Lives Matter and to get involved in race issues that are relevant to us all. And I think if we are just focused only on our own narrow agenda, we lose. If we broaden our civil rights platform, we can. Go ahead, question.
Why did you decide to leave the public sector for the private sector? And do you think you were able to achieve a meaningful change in the private sector that you would have been able to if you stayed in the public sector?
Oh, Lord, yes. My dad worked in the Senate his whole career, and then I went there for 10 years. And actually, I'm I would say, a liberal Democrat. I worked for a liberal Republican, which don't exist anymore. There's nobody who would self-describe as a liberal Republican that we run out. But I think change there was hard, slow, and today it's affirmatively difficult to find
or get past partisanship to achieve anything. The private sector has so leapfrogged, and actually I have to tell you, my friends in the Hill, I have so many still, who say, we need a CEO or a business leader to testify. We need them to come up here and tell us, because they're disproportionately Republican. They disproportionately speak to their Republican friends, and yet they're very aggressive about, changes like marriage and acceptance and inclusion. They get it pretty quickly. So they're great messengers to the Hill. And if you want to have Republicans listen to somebody, send them a CEO. And we've done that. Some of these CEOs have been really good about that, getting up there and testifying. So I think it does help, and it gives me encouragement. And also, too, Capitol Hill is a great place to work, and it's probably for younger people. I mean, it's really a great postgraduate education. All of you should work there right as soon as you get out of school, because it's a great learning experience. But you take those learnings and knowledge of public affairs and take them into the private sector, and I think you can do a lot. Other questions? We're here? Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about, because they may not be familiar with the AIDS quilt, can you give some background on that and
Sure.
the strategy and a tactic, and was there any sort of corporate
Yeah.
movement behind that?
The AIDS quilt, the NAMES project, it was called formally, but it's the AIDS quilt. And the AIDS quilt, actually, is funny. It hasn't been here in years, but God, if you guys could have seen it when it was on the mall. The biggest textile quilt in the world, filling up, acre after acre, and every one of those patches representing a person who passed away from AIDS. It's very powerful. Every celebrity you've ever heard of, but also friends, family. It's very emotional. It's very powerful. It was designed in the 80s. I think it was originally, Cleve Jones was one of the spirits behind it, who was a friend of Harvey Milk's. If you saw Milk, he was one of the characters in the film. But Cleve came up with the idea that, and others, that this would be the best way for us to commemorate people, is to create something on their behalf. And so my ardent message, and it was a singularly huge deal. I think one of the documentaries on it won an Oscar, but now it's too big. It's too large. I don't know how many panels are still being added, but when they put it together, it's so vast, it takes colossal expense, time, and effort to present it. So mostly it's presented in parts, I think, today. But when it was brought out there, and the other thing is there are people there volunteering 24/7 when it was on display, and they would have to cover it if it ever rained. So they would cover it, protect it, and it was swarmed with people seeing it and mostly walking quietly and weeping, seeing the loss. When you see death, mortality on that level, it cannot not change you. It's just an extraordinary statement. Now, interestingly, that was one of America's first philanthropies. They actually were the first airline to fly the quilt because it required a huge cargo, capability, and they would fly that quilt to various places. And today, it's only in parts, so I think it's shown, it's traveling a lot more, less expensively, I believe. But if you ever see a film about it or anything, it's just such a powerful story. But also takes you back to the time when AIDS meant in America, certainly in the 80s, that you would not survive. That it decimated populations. It created infrastructure of caring and health services that gave people created. That still exists. But now they're treating lots of populations and they're dealing with lots of issues because HIV has so changed. But at that time, you cannot understate the dread, the fear, the dire straits that people felt when they had the diagnosis, the self-delusions about it, and the idea that it was hopeless. And hopelessness is such, the quilt probably was the best single antidote to that because it gave you something to do to commemorate people's lives. Very creative, very amazing to see the beauty of it, especially from the air when you could see it across this large swath of the nation's capital. So I do thank you all to take a look at it if you can.
Yeah, and you can, if you go to the NAMES project website, which still exists, you'll see that there are pieces of it in various cities. You can say,
Yes.
click on see the quilt, so you'll see some of it. You can also get these great aerial photos. If it was 12 acres, I think in
At the
'96,
last,
the
yeah.
last time the whole thing went to Washington,
Right.
the largest community art project ever done still today.
It is. It's quite beautiful. Last question or two? Anybody else?
I actually
She has a question?
How did you get so handsome? But secondarily, so these guys, a lot of the people, I know a few in this room, but a lot of people on this campus are part of a movement run by them. They're contemporaries, civil disobedience for racial justice, climate justice, immigration justice. And there's one, see who's over there. So this is what they're doing, and they're actually shaking things up. It's not particularly polite, it's fantastic. So what can they be learning from this? Who should they be talking to? Which businesses? What businesses have a stake in making them happy?
Well,
Treating them as
all of
market?
them have a stake in that. But I'm going to say one thing. I grew up out of the '60s, so what you're about today is so reminiscent. My brother went to Selma right after the bridge, and he was down there during that time. And you have life lessons, all of us do, that breaking or standing up to the law is a very powerful option. It's not for everybody because there are risks. But at the same time is that businesses are paying a lot more closely to that movement because to them, what happened in Missouri yesterday, amazing. I mean, that was amazing, but also you notice, I noticed one thing. I think the student body was fairly well aligned, but having the football team, that's an organization that in most universities is responsible for a huge amount of money. And so that's how I think it helped get their attention. Is once you stop competitive athletics on campus, you stop the machine that raises money for them. So they almost had no choice. So, but again, getting rid of the president is not a goal. It's not a victory even. It's just a moment. And as they said, they don't want to be a moment, they want to be a movement. And so getting rid of somebody is not an answer. It's who now and what now. Because the hard work is not after, it's right after the protest. It's after the protest hopefully succeeds or makes a difference and the message gets across. But it's what you do afterwards actively to change things. And you have to have leaders who are convinced you have a cause. So I think students today, it's interesting, they're turning into what, the modern version of what we had in the 60s, although we didn't have Facebook or Twitter or anything else. A lot of people are just digital activists, but that helps. But doing other things, I think, has really been inspiring. Businesses, if they don't take it into account, do so at their peril. So there.
So there.
So there.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you all.